You hear about the national debt all the time, right? It's always this massive, almost made-up sounding number. But what is it really? And when the government racks up all that debt, who actually ends up paying the bill? All right, let's dive in and really unpack this, because it's one of the most misunderstood topics out there. First, let's just get a sense of the scale we're talking about. In 2025, the U.S. national debt is projected to hit a mind-boggling $38 trillion. I mean, that's a number so big it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. It's more than the entire economic output of the whole country in a year. So a number that huge can start to feel a little meaningless, can it? To really understand what it represents, we've got to look at how it gets built year after year after year. Well, it all starts with this thing called a fiscal deficit, and it's actually pretty simple. As the Corporate Finance Institute breaks it down, a deficit is just what happens when the government spends more money than it brings in from taxes in any given year. The national debt? That's just the grand total of all those yearly shortfalls piled on top of each other throughout history. But see, this isn't just some boring accounting exercise. This debt has very real consequences that go way beyond a government spreadsheet. It really gets to a fundamental question about fairness and who's responsible for what. So let's ask the big question. If the government is borrowing money to pay its bills today, who is on the hook to pay that money back down the road? The answer to that? Well, that tells you everything about who really bears the cost. Okay, so the government basically has two ways to pay for things. It can use tax financing, pretty straightforward, right? Current taxpayers pay for today's spending. Or it can use debt financing, and here's the crucial difference. Borrowing money doesn't make the cost disappear. It just kicks the can down the road for future taxpayers to deal with. And this gets to the heart of the matter. Research from legal scholar Daniel Shaviro really nails this down. He concludes that the main effect of government debt is what he calls an intergenerational transfer. We are, in effect, pulling economic consumption from the future into the present. It lets us consume more today, but we leave the bill for future generations. Now, you've probably heard that old argument, right? The one that says the debt doesn't really matter because we just owe it to ourselves. But Shaviro's work shows why that's a huge oversimplification. Because while it's true that it's a transfer between Americans, it's a very specific kind of transfer. It's between overlapping generations. The young and even those not yet born are essentially being asked to pay for the consumption of people who are alive today. So we've established that we're shifting a massive financial burden forward in time. But this opens up a whole other can of worms, a much deeper, more philosophical question. Is that actually unfair? I mean, at first glance, it seems like a total no-brainer. Pushing our costs onto our kids and grandkids? That sounds obviously wrong. But is it really that simple? Is this transfer automatically an injustice? To really answer that, Daniel Shaviro argues we have to zoom out and look at the whole picture. We don't just pass down debt. We also pass down a massive inheritance of positive things. Think about it, all the accumulated capital from savings and investment, scientific knowledge, technology, infrastructure, not to mention all the personal efforts parents make for their children. These are all huge, positive transfers to the future. And this is his core point, to get obsessed with the government's debt and demand perfect balance right there, while completely ignoring all these other massive positive things we give to the future, is, in his words, strangely blinkered and formalistic. It's like looking at the entire relationship between generations through a tiny keyhole. So the big takeaway here is that, yeah, the debt is a very real transfer of a financial burden, but it's just one piece of a much, much more complicated web of transfers between us and those who will come after us. Figuring out what's truly fair in that context, that's an incredibly tough philosophical problem with no easy answers. Okay, but even if we can't settle that giant philosophical debate, that doesn't mean the debt is harmless. Not even close. Let's pull this back from the abstract and talk about the very clear and very present dangers our economy is facing because of this right now. The reality is, regardless of where you land on the whole fairness argument, the sheer size of the debt creates immediate economic risks that we simply cannot afford to ignore. Get this. In fiscal year 2024, the U.S. government spent $881 billion just on interest payments for the debt. To put that in perspective, that is more money than the entire defense budget for the same year. And that's the real kicker, the opportunity cost. Every single dollar we spend just to service our past debt is a dollar we can't invest in things that create future growth, like infrastructure, education, research, or economic development. We're paying for the past instead of building the future. And this chart, wow, This shows just how vulnerable we are. The Congressional Budget Office projects we'll spend nearly $14 trillion on interest over the next 10 years. But look what happens if interest rates tick up by just 1%, which is a pretty common thing to happen. The cost jumps by over $3 trillion. That's how sensitive our entire budget is to the whims of global interest rates now. All of this points toward the ultimate danger, the nightmare scenario, something called a debt spiral. It's a vicious cycle where the interest payments get so huge that the government has to borrow new money just to pay the interest on its old money. The debt starts to grow exponentially, becoming totally uncontrollable and risking a major financial crisis. Which brings us right back to our central question. The national debt is so much more than a number on a spreadsheet. It's a complex transfer between generations that raises these deep philosophical questions about fairness. But it's also a clear and present economic risk that's holding us back, right now and threatening to trap our future. So the real question we have to ask is, what kind of inheritance, both the assets and the liabilities, are we choosing to leave behind?